A lot of green going around for Gordon Hayward. The news yesterday that he's agreed to a big-time deal with the Celtics. 538 senior writer Chris Herring took an in-depth look at Hayward's numbers on the floor and how he may fit into a Boston team that seems primed to at least make a run at Cleveland in the East. And Chris joins us now. Really interesting stuff in here, Chris. What was the one stat that stood out to you that you learned about Gordon Hayward and what kind of productivity he gives you?
What I really like about Gordon Hayward, he got a lot stronger this past season. When you look at his numbers in the past, you'd see those pictures, kind of almost the before and after photos of when he just got in the league. And he earlier was a guy that got a shot blocked a pretty decent amount, just didn't have a lot of muscle on him. And now when you look at the guy, he's strong, he gets to the basket, he finishes through contact. And the number that I thought was really interesting, he had 45 and ones during the course of the season. He only got a shot blocked 43 times, and there were only 3 other wing players that had ratios like that in the league, and those 3 guys were LeBron, Kawhi, and Kevin Durant. And so it tells you that he's kind of in an elite class right now when you talk about guys that can finish through contact and get the N1s without ever really getting their shot blocked. And it tells you a lot about how he's kind of changed this game around the rim, where he shot 69% from the field. Yeah,
that is certainly elite company when you're in there with LeBron and Kawhi and KD. You call him an organic scorer. What does that mean, and how does it apply to his role with the Celtics?
Well, what I meant by that is the fact that he can score without really needing a lot of other things to happen in order for him to get buckets. And so he's really, really good in transition. When you look at what he does in fast break situations, he was the second most efficient scorer in the league, right behind Jimmy Butler, among guys that had 100 shots or more in transition opportunities. And so it was really interesting watching him play with such a slow-paced team like Utah. They were last in the league in pace, and they have been for the last 3 years. But going to a team like Boston now, you would expect to see him have more opportunities to run when he grabs a rebound, not having to wait for kind of his slow-poke teammates to get down the court, and an offense that has the possibility now to be a lot more explosive than what he had there in Utah, because they're not having to wait to get set up. And Utah was a team that went into the last 4 seconds of the clock more than any team in the league, and Boston definitely is not that.
Okay, the big question, I guess, hovering over all of this is how does Gordon Hayward mesh with Isaiah Thomas, a guy who spends a lot of the time with the ball in his possession? What did the numbers tell you there?
Well, we kind of have to wait and see with that, because Isaiah Thomas, while you'd like to look at Gordon Hayward and say this is a top-flight scorer and a top-shelf scorer, he really doesn't necessarily play that way. When you look at the guys in the league that scored 20 points a game, he ranks right near the bottom of those guys. I think there's 31 of them, and I think he's 24th in terms of his usage rate. He really isn't shooting the ball that much and taking over games that much. His usage rate basically stays the same in fourth quarters, meaning he's not taking any more shots in fourth quarters and in clutch time than he is in the first quarter. Isaiah Thomas, on the other hand, is taking 46% of his team's shots basically in those clutch situations, which is up from 33% in the first couple quarters. And so he's taking it upon himself and kind of putting his team on his back. Gordon Hayward really hasn't had to do that. You remember Joe Johnson and that Clippers series kind of taking over the first few games of that series. So Gordon Hayward really is not that type of guy, and it'll be interesting to see whether he kind of lets Isaiah Thomas continue to assume that role, or whether they want him to step into more of a scoring role with a team like this now that he's coming in as such a big free agent.
Hey, Chris, we had Tom Haberstroh in yesterday, and he was pretty much lining up the offensive numbers for Gordon Hayward and Paul George, and they pretty much mirror each other on that end of the floor. George, of course, is an outstanding defensive player. What kind of a defender is Gordon Hayward?
Gordon Hayward is a pretty good defender, in my opinion. I think he's gotten a lot better. Again, when you look at the before pictures and after pictures that I call them, Gordon Hayward came in the league very, very thin, very skinny. It takes guys that come into the league as a first-year, second-year guy time to really put on the muscle and the bulk that they need to try to guard somebody like LeBron. Obviously, Hayward's always been tall enough to do that, but to have the size to do it is a different thing. He's gotten a lot better, and I think it helped quite a bit that he was with Rudy Gobert, with George Hill. A lot of these guys with Utah, they had the third best defense in the league, and they had the sort of defense that he'll be playing with now in Boston, where he's going to be asked to rotate and to switch his assignments quite a bit because of the type of defense they play. Getting out to the three-point line are both things that both of those teams emphasize defensively. So he's actually a lot better than I think he gets credit for. There's always kind of the white men can't jump, and a lot of the people, Reddick and Dunleavy and all these guys, people assume they can't defend. I think Gordon Hayward deserves a little bit more credit for the way that he defends, and I think he's gotten a lot better at it over the last 2 or 3 years.
A really revealing look at what Gordon Hayward gives a team. The team he's going to be giving it to is the Boston Celtics for the next few years. Chris Herring from 538. Check it out. Carrie?
All right, David, thank you so much. Let's continue the conversation about free agency and what's happening in the NBA. Our Cavs reporter, Dave McMenamin, is here in Los Angeles. The first time that you've been able to sit next to me, so I'm excited. What am I doing?
You're visually emoting?
I'm visually emoting, yes.
I can feel that, yes.
Let's continue from the Gordon Hayward conversation. The Cavs haven't made any significant moves during free agency, and the Celtics have Gordon Hayward, and we're giving it a lot of attention as if this could be possibly something to look for in the East.
Right.
Your take on what the Cavs are doing in free agency?
Well, the Cavs' #1 target was Paul George, and they had a deal with Denver and with Indiana that fell apart at the last minute. But when I spoke to a source within the Cavs when that happened, their feedback was, you know what? Well, guess what? We're still the class of the East. That's the way they tried to rationalize it to deal with the disappointment. Now, what do they say when this Gordon Hayward deal happens? You know, they can't just have that standing anymore just to say that, oh, hey, we're still the 3-time defending Eastern Conference champions. Now the team that they played in the Eastern Conference Finals, who had a injured star in Isaiah Thomas, has added probably the second biggest name to move in the offseason.
So I don't think that move is enough to beat the Cavs. You know, Windhorst said earlier the Cavs have 3 excellent players. I tried to pin them down and say how many excellent players do the Celtics have. So I'll ask you the same question.
Yeah.
Let's go toe for toe.
Yes.
How many excellent players do they have on their roster?
Well,
would you say
Avery
1?
Bradley's usually not considered an excellent player, but in a series against the Cavs, when Kyrie Irving's gone on record and said Avery Bradley guards me better than any other player in the league, I might call him excellent. Isaiah Thomas without a messed up hip like he had in the playoffs, you could call him excellent. And Gordon Hayward, we'll give him excellent as well. So,
all right,
so there's 3.
It's 3 on 3 right now.
There's 3 on 3, right? And then
speaking of 3 on 3, you know where I'm transitioning to.
The big 3?
The big 3.
Oh, yeah.
You see Chauncey Billups the other night?
I actually didn't see the game.
Okay. Well.
No. How'd he do?
He did okay.
Yeah.
Okay. Meanwhile, he takes his name out of the running for the GM position. That's why we're here. That's what we want to talk about. So where does that stand in terms of who's going to be in their front office? Chauncey no longer wants to be in consideration, doesn't want the job, essentially. Do you know why?
No, other than the reason he gave Mark Spears, which he said, was really a family decision. He has a daughter who's going to become a senior in high school this year. But you'd have to think that the money was a factor, and the power was a factor. That's why David Griffin isn't the GM of the team right now, and it's probably the reason why Chauncey's not there. I spoke to a prominent agent who's been dealing with the Cavs throughout the free agency process. And basically, he's talking to 2 people right now, Kobe Altman, the assistant GM, and the owner, Dan Gilbert. The question is, will Dan Gilbert want to continue to have that Jerry Jones type of role as the season goes on, or does he absolutely need to find somebody else in place?
Give me the stats on Kobe Altman.
34-year-old guy, very sharp, coached at Columbia, came up through the Phoenix Suns organization, a protege of David Griffin. But the Cavs roster, about half of it are older than Kobe is.
I see.
So say it's a situation like last year where LeBron pulls a couple of reporters aside, me included probably, like he did in New Orleans last year, and said we're a top-heavy roster, and are we really committed to winning? And David Griffin had to have a meeting with LeBron one-on-one after that happened and kind of get him back on the same page.
Which was,
let's walk the line because you're kind of throwing your teammates under the bus here. Can Kobe Altman have the gravitas in that moment as a rookie GM potentially to do that? I don't know. And that's not taking anything away from Kobe.
That's
difficult. He's done a great job shepherding the franchise, in the interim basis. But that's a big thing to ask of a guy in his first year on the job.
Yeah, especially when you had LeBron on your team, right? 2 questions. You think LeBron leaves after next year?
I think there's a distinct possibility.
And distinct as in percentage?
I'm not going to give you a percentage because I'd have to see how the season plays out. And I think that's where his head's at, too. As long as they stay competitive and winning, it's going to be hard to walk away from that situation. But if something goes wrong, if they have a major injury or something like that would derail them, or if the Boston Celtics, who I think you're throwing a little bit of shade at, if they actually
I think they're competitive.
Competitive.
I'm just like 3. I want to know if there's we'll get back to that. Okay, you go.
No, or if the Celtics were to overcome the Cavs, I think that would give him a reason to look elsewhere to find a better winning situation.
Okay, they tell me I got to thank you.
Okay.
Does Melo come?
Oh, well,
Yeah or
okay,
no?
so he has a trade kicker that would be an extra $8 million. So you're talking about $34 million. Unless he gets bought out, I don't know if the trade would make any sense.
Yeah, it doesn't make any sense. On paper, anyway.
Right.
I'm not throwing any shade at the Celtics. Everyone knows I'm down with
Excellent
Lakers.
players.
I know. Simple question.
Okay.
I'm curious.
Okay.
As a journalist should be.
Yes, you should be.
Okay. Dave McMenamin. I'm visually emoting. Thank you for joining us here
Thanks,
in LA.
Gary.
I appreciate it.
Appreciate it.
David, I'll send it back to you.
Okay, Carrie, I'll make the sharp turn to Will Ferrell. He knows a lot of things. Actor, comedian, American treasure. One thing you may not know is that he's also part owner of the Los Angeles Football Club, the new MLS franchise that's going to debut next season. Here he is in the Heineken boot room with Bernardo Osuna.